Harris, and today I have with me Dr. Ansel Augustine. Dr. Augustine is the director of the Office of Black Catholic Ministries for the Archdiocese of New Orleans. He also serves on the Board of Trustees of St. Michael's College and is on the Board of Directors for the Congo Square Preservation Society. He is the former New Orleans Area Director for Vagabond Missions and Executive Director of Cultural Diversity and Outreach for the Archdiocese of Washington. Previously, he served as the Associate Director/Coordinator of Black Youth and Young Adult Ministry for the CYO Youth and Young Adult Ministry Office. He is also on the faculty of the Institute for Black Catholic Studies at Xavier University of Louisiana, Graduate Theological Foundation, and Loyola University New Orleans Institute for Ministry. Dr. Augustine has also served as a campus minister at Xavier University of Louisiana, Loyola University New Orleans, and St. John's University in Queens, New York. Dr. Augustine has served on the board of directors for the National Catholic Youth Young Adult Ministry Association and the National Federation of Catholic Youth Ministry. He began his career in ministry over 20 years ago when he became the youth minister at his home parish of St. Peter Claver in the Treme area of New Orleans, which he helped to rebuild following Hurricane Katrina. He has presented workshops and keynotes around the country and has written various pieces related to ministry, including the African American Catholic Youth Bible and the award-winning book, Leveling the Praying Field, Can the Church We Love Us Back? Dr. Augustine is also an Emmy-nominated producer for the documentary Black Faith Matters. Dr. Augustine has worked in prison ministry for over 25 years in various capacities. He is also an associate member of the Sisters of the Holy Family in New Orleans, Louisiana, and his website is holyhotboy.info. So that's a really impressive biography, and thank you so much for talking with me today.
No, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here with you.
And I was trying to bring up the cover of your award-winning book. I have the ebook version, which is a wonderful book, and I wrote a review of it in Black Catholic Messenger.
Amen. Thank you.
In the foreword to your book, Father Brian Massengill wrote the foreword, and he's a Catholic priest and professor of theology at Fordham University. And he described two incidents that he wanted your readers to ponder. And I'm going to read the first incident. Quote, I arrive at a suburban parish whose members are overwhelmingly white to celebrate Mass for a priest who had suddenly taken sick. I ask the usher to direct me to the sacristy. He hesitates and asks with suspicion why I want to know. I explain the situation to him, thinking my visible Roman collar is already a complete explanation. He interrogates me. You're a priest? Who sent you? After replying yes and explaining yet again, he responds, well, why didn't he send us a real priest? Father Massengill then goes on to write what he believes is the core issue. Quote, America and the Catholic Church in the United States is constituted by a normative whiteness. Whiteness is the measure of who counts, whose experience matter, who belongs, who is accepted as one of us, who is considered really Catholic, and white people become the guardians of who gets to be included as one of us, end quote. So we're going to unpack what Father Massengill wrote, but I wanted to start off by asking what inspired you to write this book that you call a love letter to the Catholic Church?
Yes, thank you once again for having me. Father Brian, who wrote the foreword, and Bishop Cherie, who wrote the afterword, are two of my mentors. You know, even though Bishop is no longer with us, his work and his life of way of ministry, caring and even speaking out, even when it was unpopular, is a way that inspired me to do what I do. So even in that, I've been in settings in some of the, I hate hearing my bio, but in those spaces that I've been where I've been the only one that looks like us or thinks like us, I've sometimes been the thorn speaking out to the masses about what they're doing either wrong or trying to point out who is not at the table, who's not being included in this discussion or decision-making process or project or event they're trying to put together. So many times I've been the black sheep in those spaces and places. Uh, but the reality of this book, I was asked by Orbis Press to write something, and time was going on, and I moved to DC 3 days before the pandemic shut Washington DC down, so I had nothing but time up there. Um, but the reality of us during that time period, and I was working with Cardinal Gregory, our first African American cardinal in the church, who was my boss up there, and we were dealing with just various murders of unarmed black people during that time period. One of the main ones, and probably the most visible, that caused a change in the world in regards to attention, was the murder of George Floyd. So as after the murder of George Floyd, I was asked by a lot of these institutions and organizations in which, I was the troublemaker, to all of a sudden put together the anti-racism statement or help with anti-racism resources because they didn't know. But they realized it was something that their constituents, and plus it was the hot button issue of the time post George Floyd murder. So I was doing this work, and what I realized is there was really nothing for youth ministers, campus ministers, theology teachers in Catholic schools, to have this discussion with their young adults or youth from a Catholic perspective. So hence the idea for the book, the questions in the back of each chapter, just different things for me as a youth minister, what I would need to help have the discussion, even though we talk about this stuff in the Black Catholic community on a regular basis. But what would I need for my colleagues, for them to have this discussion? So that was the idea for the book, the part I wrote. And it was after the part I wrote came about that we had the idea of, and I had moved back home at the time, to reach out to Father Brian Massengill and Bishop Shree to add their parts to the book. So that was the motivation, was to create a resource to have this discussion about America's original sin, racism, as the USCCB calls it, from a Catholic perspective.
And since you've written the book, have you received feedback that youth ministers have been using the book and that it's been benefiting their work?
You know what's crazy? The initial population I wrote it for, the youth ministers and the youth and those that work with them, young adults, campus ministers, yeah, they have been using it and they've been appreciative of it. But I've been getting more, I guess, feedback in a positive sense and invitations, because there's been negative feedback. Of course, you challenge the church. There's those that out there that don't think that, that's appropriate, even though if you love something, you challenge it to be better. It has been from a lot of the elders, the baby boomers, and book clubs from around the country, around the world, really, Catholic institutions that are made up of that demographic that have asked me to come speak to them at their conferences via webinars, because it was the pandemic, and post-pandemic, they were still meeting virtually. And so here I am on a Zoom call with, a bunch of older white women and having this discussion, and they might have, a couple of, people of color there too as well. But I guess there was this recognition of what they had grown up in and may have participated in unintentionally, but also seeing now what they wanted to do to address it. So yeah, that was the shock to me, was the demographic that really took hold of this book.
Well, that's amazing. And it is really such a gift to the church. So I wanted to ask you, as someone who has spent 25 plus years ministering, working, praying with, and advocating for Black Catholics, do you feel the Catholic Church loves Black Catholics back?
That's a good question. I would say, just as with many of the other demographics, youth, young adults, but specifically when we look at Black Catholics, yes, there is love there, but I do believe it is not unconditional, right? It's under condition of when it's convenient, i.e., let's go back to the murder of George Floyd. Black Catholics were all of a sudden brought to the forefront, to address issues, to create opportunities, and blah, blah, blah. But now that issue is not at the forefront anymore, we've sunken back to the back. So for me, I do believe that there is love there, but I do believe it is conditional. And I think that is the work that we're trying to do with a lot of this anti-racism work within the church and even outside the church. How can we be loved genuinely, unconditionally, as we are called to be, just as we see other demographics being loved in that way?
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that there was kind of this outpouring of interest in Black Catholics and Black Americans in general after George Floyd, but we also saw the backlash. And for example, the statement that, I think it was a speech that the former president of the USCCB, Jose Gomez, had put out that was basically calling Black Lives Matter and the racial justice movement a dangerous pseudo religion. So it's like it was at the same time where it seemed like a certain Black person is considered good, or a certain way to talk about issues is good. But then if you're not doing it that specific way, then there's a backlash. You're unchristian. It's a danger to the society. Did you notice that also? I mean, you said that you have received a little bit of backlash from the book.
Yeah, even before the book, that was always the backlash that I received from even at home. As the Bible says, a prophet is not welcome in their own home. I don't have hair, but I've been beheaded here many a times, right? And still am right now in various ways, because I honestly believe we have to call out sin where you see it, call out the truth, even if it's makes people uncomfortable, even if it's your own people, because sometimes we can be complacent and uphold some of the injustices that our people are suffering from. Like I said, a lot of those institutions that I was a part of, some of which are in my bio, others that I've helped out in other capacities. When I was calling out the stuff that they were complicit in, they didn't want me at the table anymore. So I've been blackballed and ostracized and labeled, like I said, a radical, for lack of better words, because y'all doing wrong, y'all. You know what I'm saying? In the name of Jesus. And I'm not saying I'm perfect in any way, shape, or form, or I'm better than anybody or holier than anybody. But I know this: I have just as much right beyond, because God created me. And if we're going from the Catholic perspective, the calling of my baptism to be a priest, king, and prophet, to do what I need to do to call out the church in those sinful ways. So yes, there has been backlash. Even some forms, I think something of the more shocking area is even in our own community, the forms of jealousy and brokenness that we face because of what we've been through as a community, with some of the powers that be for it. But there have been moments of hope. At the national convention, the first ever joint convention of the youth and adults of the Knights and Ladies of Peter Claver, that took place here in New Orleans right before the National Black Catholic Congress. I had a moment with my friend, and he's a good friend of mine. I love him to death, Bishop Joseph Perry from Chicago. We went out to eat and we were catching up on life and everything. And, sometimes they can be in their own little world. He didn't know the book, right? And so, I gave him a copy. He called me after he landed in Chicago. He said he read the book on the flight. He said, Ansel, this is great. I didn't know this existed. He wanted to buy, buku copies to share with whoever is in his group. And I showed him, how to get the bulk copy, cheap. I want to get the hookup, as we say. But for me, there are moments, just as many detracting moments and saddening moments, because you see how this reality of America's original sin has infected a lot of our institutions and thought process, even amongst our people. There are those moments of hope, like with Bishop Perry, and even when I'm with those older ladies, talking about this sin and what they can do, even if what I share with them, what they could do, is so uncomfortable for them, because people want to do the easy stuff. We as church folk don't want to get uncomfortable a lot of times, and that's been the challenge. But we have to push ourselves to be uncomfortable to create this heaven on earth. Ultimately, if we truly are people of faith, we believe this is not our ultimate home.
Yeah.
We're trying to get to heaven. And for me, I'm trying to hear good and faithful servant, well done. So what does that mean for me that I have to do in these spaces, and even suggesting to other people what they need to do in their own communities? So it's been a challenge.
Absolutely. So I used to laugh when people on social media would say, I didn't know Black Catholics exist. But then I would think the first Black Catholic religious order for women, the Oblate Sisters of Providence, was founded in 1829. There are many historical Black churches that have been around since the late 1800s. There's the Black Catholic HBCU Xavier. There are 3 million Black Catholics. So we're definitely here. And I stopped thinking that it was funny that people didn't know Black Catholics existed. And I began to think that the institutional church is really responsible for the image that we don't exist, and we're kind of erased from the church and our history is erased. What do you think about the invisibility of Black Catholics in the American Catholic Church?
I really appreciate you asking this question because it brought up something that happened this week. So I'm the director of the Office of Black Catholics here for the Archdiocese of New Orleans, one of the few remaining offices of Black Catholics in the country. Many offices have been either closed or merged and become multicultural offices and different things like that. But here in New Orleans, and we'll talk about this later, the uniqueness of our Black Catholic history here and the existence of this office and the work that we do. And you named one of them, Xavier University of Louisiana, the only Catholic HBCU in the country, and the only Catholic university founded by a saint itself. So St. Catherine Drexel founded it herself, unlike other Catholic institutions which may be named after saints, but or their religious orders. No, St. Catherine Drexel came down here, built this place, put the money and help however she did to create the space. But when we look at the invisibility of Black Catholics in America, I had a discussion with across the hall from me from the Office of Black Catholics is the Family Life and Marriage Apostolate, right? And me and the gentleman over there talk frequently about what we can do together. He's not from here. He's a white gentleman. And we have these discussions. And then a couple of weeks ago, actually months ago, we had a meeting where him and his wife came to dinner with myself and several of the members of the leadership of the Knights and Ladies of Peter Claver to talk about how the Family Life Apostolate could really address the issues and needs in the Black Catholic community. It was eye-opening for him. Well, he had a follow-up meeting this week, and he came and talked to me about it with my good friend, who's also the associate director of the Knights of Peter Claver, Percy Marchand. And he said, Percy just opened my eyes to some things, because Percy gave him this analogy about they were talking about what they could do for Black Catholics, and almost like because it's now on his radar, now it's a new thing for him, right? Even though we've been here. And Percy reminded him and brought up this idea. He said, it's almost like fatherhood, right? If you have a daughter and she's all of a sudden interested in ballet, you don't know ballet exists, but it's been there forever, making an impact in the lives of people that have been a part of it. But now that you're interested in it and now that you're aware of it, all of a sudden you're learning about ballet stuff. You're, going to this event, that event, learning and becoming a small, somewhat of an expert in that area or field. And he told them this, Black Catholics have been here, right? And now you are aware of it, but you need to understand the struggles that we have been through and what we are going through, and how you as a person in power can address and collaborate, not to fix, because that's not your job to fix. Yeah. We can fix ourselves if we have the opportunities and resources, but to create those opportunities and resources so we can do what we need to do for ourselves and within our community. So when we look at the invisibility, for me, my challenge is when I came in and ran the office from 2013 to 2017, before I came back now, it was to raise the awareness that this office existed. One of the main things when I would go to churches or spaces and places, and I was privileged because I was in the church. So I knew that there was an Office of Black Catholics. But many people were like, there's an Office of Black Catholics? What do they do? So raising the awareness that we exist to build grassroots community support. And I think that's what I've been trying to do and try to rebuild since I've been back. The pandemic did a lot to deny that. But for me, to raise the awareness that we as an office, but we as a people are here, especially not only in the outside, but also to my colleagues here in the Chancery, to let them know we're here.
Yeah. And for people who aren't familiar with the Office of Black Catholics, can you just kind of give a little bit of explanation of what you do exactly?
Okay. So in our mission statement, we talk about existing to coordinate with our Black Catholic community. We have 26 Black Catholic churches here, 3 Black Catholic high schools, Xavier University, the headquarters of the Knights and Ladies of Peter Claver. But we also serve as an advisory for the Archbishop on the needs of Black Catholic ministries, but also serving just as any other office in a collegial and collaborative capacity with other offices in various events and things throughout the community. So some of the things we do, coming up September 16th is our annual Gospel Fest event, where we have the Black Catholic Gospel choirs come together. Price of admission is non-perishable food items for Second Harvest Food Bank. With this event, we've raised over 200 tons of food for Second Harvest Food Bank. Black Catholic History Month is November, so doing events and educational stuff throughout the month through then. Martin Luther King Day of Service, activities with youth and our Black Catholic marriage retreats, just different things like that. But not only in a bubble for Black Catholics, but as a way of expanding our reach and then educating our other colleagues in the community.
Okay. And you are very qualified to do that work. Can you talk a little bit about the doctorate that you have and just like what made you want to pursue a higher degree in ministry?
Well, when I started ministry, I already had my master's degree. Uh, and when I was a youth minister at my home parish, St. Peter Claver in Treme. Treme is the oldest Black neighborhood in the country. So, I was doing what I had to do as a youth minister. Hurricane Katrina hit, and then I started working for the diocese as the coordinator of Black youth and young adult ministries. In that capacity, I was going to national meetings, national gatherings, and this, that, and the other. And God rest his soul, our pastor, Father Mike, who was like my dad, was like, Ansel, we need you to get as many not accolades, but get your resources together. Because when you're at this table with these people that may not think you belong there, we need you to have as much as you have and let them know that you deserve to be at this space. So that's when I went to go get my DMin. I found it out the summer they moved us to the University of Notre Dame, the Institute for Black Catholic Studies. Summer after Katrina 2006, Xavier was catching up on their spring semester with their undergrads during the summer. So all summer programs had to find somewhere else to go. So the Institute for Black Catholic Studies, we went to University of Notre Dame in Indiana. And that's where I found the doctorate, the DMin that I got from Graduate Theological Foundation out there, because it was mostly online. So the impetus was to the Edmondites, Father Mike's religious order, were going to pay for it and different things like that. Unfortunately, Father Mike died as I was starting the program. And the Edmondite, he was the only Edmondite left in Louisiana. They're in Selma, Alabama area, and Vermont. And that's whose board of trustees I'm on for St. Michael's College in Vermont out there. And so a deacon, one of our Black deacons, heard about my plight about school, and he had his own insurance company. And Deacon called me to his office and he gave me a check to finish school. So I knew it was God and
Yeah.
Father Mike and all these ancestors and people that believed in me looking out for me. So I had to do what I had to do. And that's why I use what I have in their memory and their honor to make a way for those coming after me.
Wow, that's such a blessing. What a great story. So shifting a little bit, you say on page 53 of your book, quote, society can accept Blackness as long as it is entertaining, music, sports, and so forth, but will deny it if it challenges Eurocentric norms as a whole, social justice protest, history that contradicts Western thought, and ideas, spiritual practices, and the like. And I think we're seeing that a lot with the backlash right now to teach the AP African American history classes and teaching Black history. Can you expound upon that you believe that society can accept Blackness when it's entertaining, but when it's pushing back against Eurocentric norms, then it's unacceptable?
Yes, I go back to what my mentor, Father Brian Massengill, has said so many times. We as Americans, but especially white America or institutions of white America, do not want to be made uncomfortable or to be seen as irrelevant or wrong. Let me just put it like that. And when we call out racism or when we call out those things, we are doing just that, making them uncomfortable, doing the things that make them feel and see that what they have been doing is wrong. And so those of us that have done that have been labeled as troublemakers and pushed to the side. And many times you will have many of our brothers and sisters that look like us, and maybe even from our communities, that will want to be so accepted by these institutions that they'll come to the forefront and do what they need to do to be seen. Like I said, so many times, and I think this is what's one of the most hurtful pieces. I've been quote unquote undermined, or my people like me have been undermined by people that we thought were in our corner, but they've been wanting to be part of that power system or part of that elite group. So they'll do what they can. We see so many times throughout history, beyond the Catholic Church, but beyond the Catholic Church, people like Black folks that are entertainers, whether it's music, whether it's through sports, whether it's through comedy, whatever it is, people that make people have a good time. And that's good. That's human nature.
Yeah.
But also at the end of the day, when you look at the history of um, the Martin Luther Kings, the Malcolm X's, the Dick Gregorys, the all the great women and men that have out there that have sacrificed. Even when we look at the challenges that Sister Thea Bowman gave, she wasn't always accepted. That we, and it's funny, we revere these people, these six on the road to canonization right now. Mother Andrea DeLille from here, Father Augustus Tolton, Mother Mary Elizabeth Lang, Julia Greeley, Venerable Pierre Toussaint, Sister Thea. Yeah, we love them now, but I'm sure during their time when they were challenging the systems and the narratives of their time, they weren't seen as holy men and women, even though they were doing the holy work that we acknowledge now. So for me, I'm thinking of the challenges they may have had to face then by people that look like us, right? Because it was challenging to society. So for me, they're my inspiration because they didn't allow society to define them. They define society. And wherever I go, I never fit in. Either I'm too holy for some places or not holy enough for others, and that's their standards. But I know if God brings me to somewhere, I'm supposed to do what I'm supposed to do as Ansel in that space. And it's hard. It is hard and it's hurtful because right now, my biggest challenge is many of the young people that I've raised, that I've invested in, and their families have bought into the system. Some are ordained, some, have gone through the powers that be, the navigate, their courses and come out with that mindset that what is happening is right. So it undermines a lot of what I've done, and even the attacks that are there, by other folks. You know what I'm saying? The chess games that are played by other institutions and other people in power that know those are Ansel's kids, right? And using the game, to do whatever is there. But at the end of the day, what keeps me going is I stand on the shoulders of my ancestors like Bishop Cherie, like Father Mike, like Father Ledoux, even the people that started this office, like Mrs. Sophie Arenbureau, who was a mother to a bunch of us, and their unwavering, unapologetic emphasis on advocating for Black people to live in their authentic lives and be their authentic selves, no matter what. Because if we're made in the image and likeness of God, then we're good.
Absolutely. So within the Catholic Church, there was a reckoning with institutional racism in the late 1960s and 1970s after the assassination of Martin Luther King and with the rise of the Black Power movement. In April 1968, the National Black Catholic Clergy Caucus issued a founding document, and its opening lines read, quote, "The Catholic Church in the United States, primarily a white racist institution, has addressed itself primarily to white society and is definitely a part of that society. On the contrary, we feel that her primary, though not exclusive work, should be in the area of institutional, attitudinal, and societal change." A week later, the National Conference of Catholic Bishops released their own statement, admitting they, as an institutional church and all Catholic people, needed to do more to combat racism, build bridges between the white and Black communities, and assist struggling Black Americans. 11 years later, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops released Brothers and Sisters to Us, which was another pastoral letter on racism, and then in 2018 released Open Wide's Our Heart, a pastoral letter on racism. However, in your book, Leveling the Playing Field, you write that these efforts on behalf of the American church have failed to have a lasting impact or really make a difference. You said, quote, "There is no power shift or racial reconciliation where real issues are addressed or people in authority who may be part of the problem are removed. Thus, the cycle continues and more people of color lose faith in the church, especially our youth." So can you talk more about why you think these efforts have been ineffective? And with many offices of Black Catholics, like you mentioned, either closing or merging to become multicultural offices that aren't specifically for Black Catholics, do you feel that the church has been backtracking?
I believe, like I said, we are loved when it's convenient. Um, look at all the challenges and attention and not to say promises, but PR statements that came out where after the murder of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, that whole time, that whole season when things were happening back to back to back to back, and where our church stood during that time period, you don't hear anything about that anymore. There are a lot of realities with bankruptcies and dioceses. We're going through one now because of the issues with priests and the lawsuits that came from a lot of their inappropriate actions and stuff that are there. Yes, in the merging of these Black Catholic offices, whether population shifts are reality here in New Orleans, our population is shifting. Ever since Katrina, gentrification has been real. Ever since the pandemic, it's been exacerbated as well because we're a tourist economy. And so with no festivals and those things to bring money in, are culture bearers. Like I said, I'm one. I'm a Black masking Mardi Gras Indian. The baby dolls, the musicians, those people that people come to see when they come to the city. We haven't had the monies coming in to make money, so people have been leaving or have to find other ways and means to get stuff together. So when we look at the closings and mergings of offices that dealt with issues that these communities deal with, yes, the lack of attention, the lack of awareness, even the lack of advocacy from our offices with other offices that do work out there. If, for example, like I said, me and my colleague at the Office of Family Life and Marriage, talk about some of the challenges that are there. But if he's not talking to me and I'm not talking to him and there's no office here to talk to him, he doesn't know what the Black Catholic family needs. If all they're doing is, all right, we're going to do a retreat on adoration and everybody come, you know what I'm saying? Or we're going to just do events in the white suburb areas, because he has no relation to get in with the Black Catholic churches. Or if all he thinks is the stereotypes that he hears on the news and not having an authentic conversation with someone that's doing the work and why those challenges are there, then we miss the mark. So yes, I do believe there's challenges in backtracking. Quick example, one of the organizations I'm a part of, they've been doing intentional and extensive DEI work within the organization and their constituents. But we had an intense discussion a couple of weeks ago because there were a couple of bishops, not a lot, but maybe 2 or 3, that had an issue with the terminology DEI. So we were talking about changing the whole naming and work that we're doing based on these 3 bishops, not because of the work that we promised we do all this time. So my challenge is for us to make sure that we are, as the Catholic social teaching tells us, in solidarity with the most vulnerable. And very many times when you talked about being invisible, we're brought to the forefront when something is a PR crisis, but then we're thrown back to the back when it's not an issue anymore. And we're, like I said, the love is conditional. So how can we truly be a church that loves all people unconditionally? And I think that's what the challenge is. And that's when we see the backtracking is the love is, all right, you're good right now, so we won't deal with you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So let's talk about the National Black Catholic Congress. That's another event that maybe people who aren't Black Catholics are not aware of. So just to give a brief history, Daniel Rudd, who was a Black Catholic journalist from Ohio and founder of the first Black Catholic newspaper, the American Catholic Tribune, organized the first Black Catholic Congress in 1889. And there were a number of congresses leading up to the 5th in 1894. Then in 1985, the Black Catholic Congress is reestablished as a coalition of Black organizations, and the first renewal Congress takes place in 1987. So there was a gap from 1894 to 1987, and there's been a series of congresses since 1987, and we just had the 13th that you attended with delegates from your diocese. So can you tell us about how many people attended from your diocese, your experience, and any takeaways you have?
Okay. So to answer the first question, we had almost 100 people come from the Archdiocese of New Orleans. About 76 came with the delegation that my office organized, got scholarship money for it. They paid whatever they could pay. We worked that out. Then adding into those that were exhibitors, those that were helping with the Congress, those that were there attending that on their own that we didn't even know were coming. That's a lot of dioceses had that happen. People that just came on their own. We had about 100.
Wow.
It was shocking. We were, I think, the second largest group there. Philadelphia had like a bunch, but we had to fly there. We couldn't catch a bus down, and we probably would have had more. So it's not to knock it, but it was a surprising effort. But it was a year-long process in organizing the troops and getting the stuff together. Um, to me, Congress is very important for us. My challenge with Congress this go round is it was more of a conference, a feel good, rah rah cheerleader. We're Black and we're Catholic. You know what I'm saying? But not really an opportunity, which I've seen Congresses in the past be an opportunity for us to voice our concerns to the wider church. We are here. This is what we need. How are you going to help us achieve what we need if we're truly part of the body of Christ? I felt that was missing in this Congress. And it's a challenge because, like I said, I love the organization. I love what it's supposed to be. And it was expensive. DC is not a cheap place to host a conference. And where we had it was expensive. So to get our people there was a lot of intentional and focused work and energy put into trying to raise funds so we could afford, our people to go. So that was my challenge there. I was on the UTRAC committee, and it was you're sticking young people. Many of our conferences, especially our Black Catholic conferences, God bless them, they want you there, but they don't know what to do with them. So you stick us in a big room with a bunch of high school kids that have been traveling all day. We had a great committee. We did the best we could. But if we're in the same area where lunch is being served, you're hearing a bunch of plates clicking and clanging behind you as they're setting up and doing stuff. We want to give our young people the best. We want to model them in the best. And this is one of my challenges with Congress being every 5 years is, so if you have a high school freshman, 5 years from now, he or she is in college and they're not coming back. So it's every year, every 5 years, we're dealing with a new group of young people. So how do we keep, the work going and building upon rather than, all right, here icebreakers, everybody get to know each other. What do you think the church is and blah, blah, blah kind of thing, which is important to do, but there's nothing to build upon, if that makes sense, because if young adults are in that phase of leaving the church, we all did it, rebelled and then we come back, that's just the pattern, right? But in our community, unfortunately, many times the rebellion continues and we join another faith tradition or we just leave altogether. So for me, those are my initial thoughts. I think there is a power in our gathering. I think there was about 3,000 people that came to DC because it sold out, for lack of a better word. They couldn't take any more people. But for me, and they're doing some after work now, but there was no real direct explanation of what happens from here.
Yeah.
What always frustrates me and other Black Catholic leaders around the country is, so 5 years, we're not doing nothing. Yes, there are other groups, like there's the Light Conference, there's the Knights of Peter Claver Conference, there's the various evangelization conference that happens within the Black community. Sometimes they conflict with one another, but that's a whole nother story. Is what happens now? How are we momenting and organizing ourselves to gain this momentum to do this work? So especially with our young people, we get them together. We tell them about, yes, you're important. We want to hear from you. We want you to do this, but then we don't do anything afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we drop the ball on that. And I've seen that happen so many times where we have retreats and they come back to their home parishes and there's nothing there for them. So they just lose interest. So after this mountaintop experience, what happens now that we're back in the valleys of our diocese to do this work? And to me, I think that's one of the frustrations that's there. Great event. They had great speakers. They had, great time for us to gather. For me, it's like a big family reunion. But if we're here as family, let's talk about the family issues that we need to address. And I think that's one of the things and challenges that I saw missing over the years. When I can only imagine the passion and power that was there at the first one in Washington, D.C. back in 1889. But as I was talking with some of my young adult friends, we're still talking about the same issues. So how are we growing as a people? So there's work that still needs to be done.
Yeah, I had mentioned to you I was disappointed because I had reached out to my diocese, the Diocese of San Jose, to ask if they could help sponsor me at all to go. And I received a no from them. And I think that that's kind of one of the issues when you don't have an office of Black Catholics, or you don't have people who are advocating for African Americans to be connected to the wider Catholic community, that things like the Congress are either not known or not valued. So I wanted to also ask you another question. Black Catholic Messenger published a recap of the Congress and then later published a letter to the editor on their site titled "Women Were Skirted at the 2023 National Black Catholic Congress." And in the letter, the writer detailed how praise was lavished on the priest and the bishops and the male clergy, but not the women religious leaders, like the nuns or sisters, and how even when this writer had boarded a bus, everyone was told to wait to board so the priest could board first. And they weren't even offering that same deference to the elderly religious women, even women who were in their habits. And that there were no sessions offered specifically for women. And the letter ended saying, quote, "How hard would it have been to invite a woman, religious or lay, to offer reflection at morning praise or after communion at a mass. Religious sisters of every color and ethnicity are still greatly beloved in a way that male clerics aren't. These are the kinds of thoughtless slights that wound and marginalize the majority of today's church, and they don't require doctrinal change to fix. They just require a willingness to keep our eyes fully open to make sure that everyone is at the table." So I wanted to get your reaction to that writer's experience, because we're at a moment in the church, and we had this synod, and there are women who are seeking fuller participation in the Catholic Church, but receiving very little response or any change to happen. So for Black Catholic women like myself, we're not only marginalized because we're Black, but we're also marginalized because we're women. So I just kind of wanted to get your perspective.
Yeah, no, and that's a challenging question in the fact of the matter that it's no secret that the church is a patriarchy, right? The way they operate and the way they do whatever. So even as a layperson watching what was going on at Congress, yes, vocations are important, but vocations are more than just priesthood, right? Vocations even for married life, single life, religious, like those things were not there that I felt, but like I said, I was running back and forth from the adult track to the youth track, doing what I need to do. But what I've heard several times in the feedback is what you just shared. Where were the women? And at the end of the day, it is our Black women that have kept the Black Catholic Church afloat. Right?
But when you say where were the women were there.
No, acknowledged. Let me be clear.
They
I
weren't
apologize.
acknowledged. Yeah.
Yeah. Where were the women being acknowledged? They were there. And even the religious, there was during the call to the roll call that was happening, they had to remind the MC, who was a friend of mine, what about the women religious, right? And I don't know if that was down on her list, but at that moment, people were adamant that this is need to be acknowledged. So, vocations and priesthood, diaconate, all those things are important, right? But at the end of the day, it is our women that have kept us together. It is the women that have called me to ministry. God rest her soul. My mama, Sister Eva Regina Martin, who was the Mother Superior of the Sister Holy Family, but also she was the head of the Institute for Black Catholic Studies when I started. And, she's the one that told me I need to be here. If she hadn't told me, would anybody have reached out to let me know that, hey, Ansel, this is something you could be a part of? And we see women doing this type of work all through our parishes. Priests rotate, priests come and go. Deacons, they're doing what they have to do as deacons. But many times in the life of the parish, it is the women of the parish that are doing the daily to-dos that need to get done so stuff can get going in our parishes. So yes, I believe that there's a gap there. And even right now, I'm looking up her name right now, Dr. Cynthia Bailey Mans, who's representing us as Black Catholics, but as a Black Catholic woman going to the Synod at the Vatican to vote, is important. But the sad thing is you saw the attacks on her from the Catholic community of like, who is this? What is she worthy? All these like magnifying glasses on somebody because of her gender and color, because of people that thought they were holier than Jesus, right? Which is a sad thing that we need to acknowledge. So we as Black men in the church need to defend and uplift our women, because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them, and be more vocal about it, but also create a way that we can heal those, I call them gender wounds, that are there, and being honest about it. There are many people that have been hurt by the church because they are women, and so they don't want to deal, or there may be some places and spaces that they didn't want to deal with men at all, which I understand, because there are some Black folks that don't want to deal with white folks, but this is a white institution. We have to. Many times I'm in my community having those discussions of how do we build those bridges? How do we heal those wounds? But it goes through us acknowledging, like you said, acknowledging what hasn't happened, right? The sin of omission is a real thing. Many of us as Black Catholics are hurt because the church omits our contribution, right? Not just denies it, but omits it, right? So there's nothing to deny if you don't even think about it, right? So even omitting the contribution of women is a challenge for us as well. And so for us that are in spaces and places, to be acknowledging that. So whenever I'm giving a talk, whenever I have the opportunity to bring a group to the table, who am I not including? And that's always on my mindset as well. And for me, many of my greatest collaborators, for lack of a better word, in ministry have been the women. And when I'm on the phone and I'm frustrated, who am I calling? Some of my moms in ministry, right? And they're the ones giving me more or better advice than just pray on it. No, they're giving me the real deal of what I need to do, what I need to hear, the good, the bad, the ugly, and to pray on it, but also what I need to do to help heal myself. So yes, I saw it. It's something we need to acknowledge, but it's something we need to do better to talk about as a community. How do we heal?
Absolutely. So I want to shift the conversation a little bit to talk about Louisiana. It's a very unique place and has an interesting history of Catholicism because it was originally a French Catholic territory. Can you talk about Louisiana and more specifically New Orleans and its Catholic culture and what you love about it the most?
So yes, those who know me know I love my city. New Orleans, I hold it down till the day I die. In fact, when I die, this will be my last will and testament. Throw me in the Mississippi River and let the fish eat me, right? I don't want to be buried. But anyway, and even with the culture, I'm gonna raise this camera just a little bit. You see the picture behind me with the Indians? That's the Black Masking Indians, which is a combination of our indigenous and our African culture that happened here. When in Congo Square, which is in my neighborhood, on Sundays when no one was supposed to work because of the Catholic culture, the Code Noir that regulated the lives of people of color, free and enslaved, no one was supposed to work on Sundays. So when the slave owners would go to the French Quarter to party, our ancestors would gather in Congo Square. And so if you and I were brother and sister and we were separated on different plantations, we would reconnect on Sunday in Congo Square. So it was a moment of celebration, but also it's also where jazz came from these gatherings. So the Caribbean drums, the African beats, the brass bands, instruments that came in, that's where jazz came from, this celebration that happened in this area. But it's also where a shared oppression was seen from the indigenous that were pushed off their land along with their enslaved Africans. So an alliance was made. Sometimes they would take us and make us part of the tribes and give us protection, or they would teach us how to navigate the bayous to get to freedom. So that's where the Mardi Gras Black Masking Indian culture comes from. So the feathers and headdresses are owed to the Native Americans. The beadwork, which takes us a year to make these suits, and the music is African. It goes back to the 1600s. Still something that's important for us today. Now, why is that related to Catholic culture? Now, we have St. Augustine Church in Tremé, which is the oldest Black Catholic church in the country, built by people of color, so our ancestors, enslaved and free, could worship in dignity,
And
right?
when was it built?
Huh?
When was it built?
I think it's about 177 or 178 years old.
Okay.
I'm going by because we do a Tremé Fest, a fundraiser, and I think I just saw that celebrate the 178th, and I may be wrong, but it's the oldest, right? And out of that space and places where Mother Andrea DeLeo created the Sister Holy Family, out of that space and place, you have AP Turo, civil rights leader, lawyer in there. Homer Plessy for Plessy versus Ferguson was a parishioner there. So you have all these things that came out of this space. Add to that, like I said before, we have 26 Black Catholic churches, which many of them we had more before Katrina. We have 3 Black Catholic high schools. St. Augustine High School, run by the Josephites, all male Black Catholic high school. St. Catherine Drexel Prep, uh, founded by the Blessed Sacrament Sisters, all Black Catholic female high school. St. Mary's Academy, all Black Catholic female high school, and they have a elementary school now, which is co-ed, run by the Sisters of Holy Family. And we also have, like I said, the headquarters of the Knights and Ladies of Peter Claver here. So when we look at the Catholic traditions here in New Orleans, the Black presence has been here. And when you read that statement earlier that the Black Catholic Clergy Caucus wrote to the USCCB about the church being a racist institution, one of the main writers of that was Bishop Harold Perry, who was the first Black bishop in modern times, our auxiliary here in New Orleans. And if you Google him, Bishop Harold Perry, ordination, you will see him coming out of the cathedral with white protesters holding up signs that said, God did not call non-white disciples. You know, he was spit on, stuff was thrown at him, but he still fought for us as a people. And he was a bishop for everybody, but at this mindset was we need to do what we need to do in this sign of the times right now. So, like I said, our Black Catholic heritage is not new here, but it is changing, right? Like I said, the reality of Katrina gentrification, the reality of post-pandemic people moving away, money's coming in and out. So how we address these needs and what our needs are different and evolving over time. And so, but yes, we have always been a Black city. We've always been a Catholic city, and the two have melded and merged. And sometimes I challenge my own family and friends here and those that I minister with. We as New Orleans have been spoiled, and we sometimes take for granted what we have that I'm sure you wish you had over there.
Yes,
Right.
absolutely.
And even when we were at Congress, I kept telling them, do you not understand what people here wish they had that we have here? And why it's more important for us and more of a responsibility to empower and uplift what we have, to share it with the community. We can't be selfish, but sometimes we're so territorial. You know, I'm from the 6th Ward, so I ain't gonna fool with the people from uptown, you know, or I'm not gonna deal with the people on the West Bank, or I'm never leaving the West Bank or the North Shore. And so sometimes we have work to do, you know, just as with anybody else, but we take for granted what we have here.
Yeah. So you, like I said when I read your bio, you were nominated for your work as a producer on the film Black Faith Matters.
Mm-hmm.
Can you discuss that project and the impact that Hurricane Katrina has had on your community and ministry work?
Yeah. All right. So Spirit Juice Studios and I would attend the National Federation for Catholic Youth Ministry membership meetings together, right? And I was on the board of directors for NFCYM, and I would go to these membership meetings, and many times I was the only, if not one of few of us Black folks at this meeting. And many times I would be there, not raising holy hell. I was more, you know, I was just like, but I'd get aggravated at times that like I would bring up an issue and they would talk over it. But then the next meeting a year later, all of a sudden they're wondering why this thing caused so much tension in the Black Catholic community, wherever this person was from. And I said, I told you, you know. And so, you know, when I was there, I'd be having these constant discussions. And the head of Spirit Juice, Rob Casmart, out of Chicago, and I would have these constant talks about.
Say what Spirit Juice is.
Oh, I'm sorry. Spirit Juice is a Catholic production company.
Okay.
So they produce videos locally and internationally. So yes, I apologize. Thank you for that. So Rob came to me and he was like, Ansel, we hear about all these things about Black Catholics and different things like that. My company would like to come down to New Orleans and hear you tell your story. And so that's how it came about. So they came down right before I moved to New York, right? And started filming the church. I got some young adults and, you know, just different things and places and spaces that I thought they should go to, not knowing it would get as big as it did, right?
And what year was that?
I want to say 2016.
Okay.
Yeah, 2016.
So about 10 years after Katrina.
Oh, yeah. It was about 11, maybe 12, 20, because I moved 2017.
Okay.
So 2016 is when they came. So they were filming and doing this stuff, and they filmed stuff with St. Peter Claver School, which was my favorite place in the world. I love those kids. God, I miss that place. And so we didn't know that part of the story because they wanted to come back after I had moved back home from New York. So I was only in New York for a year and 3 months. I came back. They wanted to come back and get some more B-roll. Mm-hmm. Well, it ended up adding to the story, if you saw the video, that Peter Claver School closed, right? And the effects that it had on us as a parish and our community. So for me, when we look at that story, it's just a story. I didn't know we were going to get an Emmy nomination. We didn't win because it was the Midwest Emmys, and this was a Southern story, but it is what it is. It was just an honor to be nominated, but it's a long-term impact of what Katrina has done. So, like I said, Treme, where my church is located, where also St. Augustine Church is located, and Congo Square is the oldest Black neighborhood in the country, but it's not a Black neighborhood anymore. I don't feel comfortable sometimes driving through or walking through my neighborhood because of the looks I get. Prices of homes before Katrina were 75 to 95,000. Now they're at almost $500,000 in certain places and spaces. But New Orleans and Louisiana being one of the poorest states, the local economy hasn't provided for us to afford in those spaces. So it's a lot of folks coming from everywhere else that are used to paying that amount coming here. But that affects the community, hence why people weren't sending their kids to Peter Claver School in the neighborhood anymore, right? And if cost of living is rising everywhere else, do people have that discretionary income to pay for Catholic school, right? So it's a lot of those things that have happened. So when it affects my ministry work, more of my ministry work has gone from helping youth in my community directly to advocating for our communities on a citywide and local, statewide and national level. So yeah, and also, and this is hard. When we look at the PTSD that has happened in my community since Katrina, the first thing they took out of the statewide budget was mental health support. So if you had families that had gone to, let's say, for example, Houston, me and a bunch of youth ministers were always being called to different schools to break up fights between Houston students and New Orleans students, or New Orleans students and New Orleans students from different parts of the city because of what they were experiencing. They were away from home. They were in a new city that sometimes they didn't feel welcome. The families were going through crisis, not knowing what was left. You come back, stuff that generational family portraits or wedding pictures, all these things were destroyed. We had senior citizens that when they came home and saw what was happening, they would get sick and die, and just different things like that. And so fast forward now, from that PTSD, that unaddressed trauma, you have kids that are now 21, 22. Katrina happened almost 18 years ago. So 25, we're the murder capital of the world again. Crime is out the blue. So for me, when I look at my ministry, me and several other ministers from other denominations, other religious, Nation of Islam, Protestant ministers are in the streets at night trying to prevent some of these beefs from exploding into violence. We have a stop the beef hotline that people will call if they know something is about to happen. We'll try to sit those two or groups of people, young people, down before it gets to violence, right? We've had success, but that doesn't get covered. The violence that actually happens gets covered. But I share all that to say because the reality of what ministry is here is different than what it was pre-Katrina. Even though we were a violent city, there was still a sense of community. And right now that community has been broken in various spaces and places.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So one of the issues that I write about in my new book that's coming out with Orbis Books next year is mass incarceration. And Louisiana has the highest rate of incarceration in the United States. Before our interview, I was reading a Reuters article from this year, February, that stated this Louisiana's population is roughly 62% white and 33% Black, but only 34% of people who are incarcerated are white, while 64% of people who are incarcerated in Louisiana are Black. And the article stated that the state is remarkable for its use of forced labor of people who are incarcerated, with mainly Black people forced at gunpoint to pick cotton on former slave plantations, cleaning up oil spills, being forced to participate in prison rodeos where bulls charge at incarcerated people for entertainment, and cooking food in the state capitol. So, can you talk about your 25 plus years of work in prison ministry and what you want people to know about incarceration in Louisiana?
Yes. So my role as a youth minister in St. Peter Claver pre-Katrina was different than my colleagues who might be in a white suburb. You know, our right to life issues here in New Orleans vary, and even when I would talk to Louisiana Right to Life or something like that, they want us to be at, how come Black people or the Black Catholic churches aren't with us at the abortion clinics and this, that. It's not that we are pro-abortion or anything like that, but we have other issues we're dealing with. So for me, I'm trying to keep my kids out of the system. If we have lack of resources, if we're one of the lowest states with poor education, especially post pandemic Katrina, I'm sorry, we became the first all charter school system. It was an experiment on our kids, right? So the school to prison pipeline is real here, right? These kids cannot read. These kids cannot perform. I think there was one high school that won the state championship, and 90% of their athletes couldn't accept their college offers because they were poor performing. They couldn't pass the basic tests. And so, yes, us being number one for mass incarceration in the world has affected my ministry in various ways. When I became director of the Office of Black Catholics, I was intentionally in our prisons more than I was when I was a youth minister, just visiting my kids or family members that were in there. We started doing prison retreats at various spaces and places throughout the Archdiocese, mostly at Rayburn Correctional Facility. And the community that was built amongst those men that would come to the retreats. It was me and this white nun that used to work in the project, Sister Judy Gamilla. I love her. And we go in there and we just have a moment of joy with those men. And for me, that's the most authentic ministry that I have going on. It's not about putting on airs and people trying to pretend to be this or holier than that or coming with a complaint. They are just happy to be in each other's presence. They're happy to be with us. We're happy to be with them. And it's so fulfilling. For me, and I put this picture up, I don't know if you can see it. This is my brother. He's incarcerated. He was at Angola, which is where you talked about the state penitentiary where they would pick cotton and they have the rodeo.
The former slave plantation.
Yeah. And he was one of the main woodworkers there. And he was also one of the trustees that would go work at the governor's mansion when the governor would have big things. So he would tell me about all this stuff. Now he got moved to Rayburn where I do the prison retreats. But the reality is, this whole for-profit prison industry is the key is for it to make money. So they're making money off the bodies of our Black men and women and brown now that the demographics are shifting here in Louisiana. But also nobody seems to care. There's, especially from a church perspective. And to me, that's also the origin and a sin in and of itself. When we talk about the sin of omission, we talk about we as Black Catholics are ignored. We talk about we as women are ignored. But also, when we look at these incarcerated men and women, they are forgotten. Their families get sick of visiting them or spending money because it is costly. If I could tell you how much money I've spent on, whether it's family members or young people or just community members that need help, because if you don't pay a certain fine by a certain time, you'll get a bench warrant, you're wanting to be arrested and all these things, but you can't get a decent job to help pay these fines because you have a record. So it's this circle, that continues, the hopelessness. And thus you go back to hustling to try to make money because that's the only thing you can do, which will end you either dead or locked back up. So it's a lot of work that needs to be done, and attention and hopelessness as there. But like I said, I spend so much, that's why I don't have a house. That's why I don't have certain things, because a lot of my money is going out, that I get is going right back out. So it's those challenges that we have to address and face as a community. And for us as a church, especially here in New Orleans, being number one for mass incarceration, it needs to be at the forefront of what we're doing along with everything else. But like I said, it's very far and few people in between that really see this as an issue. We too busy trying to make more priests, which is important, trying to get people to adoration, which is important. But at the end of the day, if we don't see the image of God in those that are incarcerated, which I get more of a fulfilling purpose being in the midst of those men and women than I do in my own church at times, unfortunately, because of the politics, because of, the I guess pettiness, you know what I'm saying, stuff that goes on. They are just happy to exist. And I think for us, I get my little glimpse of heaven when I'm in Rayburn Correctional Facility chapel with them.
Wow, that's amazing. Um, so to wrap up our time together, at the end of your book, like you mentioned, the late auxiliary Bishop Fernand Cherie of New Orleans wrote the afterword, and he spoke directly to all the Catholic readers and asked if enough is being done to end racism. He wrote, quote, "Child of God, do you profess and confess your complicity with racism in your silence? Are you living in denial, turning a blind eye to the racist political upheaval of January 6, 2021 on the US Capitol? The conviction of Derek Chauvin is not enough. The violence against Black bodies and people of color still permeates the American landscape and the Catholic Church. Lord have mercy." What do you think Catholics need to do to combat racism and not be complicit?
Mm. I think the challenge, and this is what I tell the older white ladies when I'm meeting with them, in their book clubs, you are here seeing that racism is real. I don't know what it took, whether it's the book, whether it's what you see on the news, but you're here at the age you're at, realizing it's real. But what are you going to do about it in regards to us seeing each other? For me, I look at, and I write about it all the time. I think one of the most profound statements I heard came from the lawyer, Brian Stevenson, when he spoke to the USCCB as they were putting this document, Open Wide Our Hearts, together, their document. And he told he told them one of the challenges that affects us in addressing racism is the issue of proximity. Meaning, it's easy for me to deny something is happening if I'm not in the proximity of where it's happening or the people that are affected by it, right? If it's not something I see as a problem because I don't see it being affecting people, then I can ignore it. So for us as church, we need to figure out how to be in better proximity with each other. I think it's the principle of the Kwanzaa principle of Ujamaa, that my brothers and sisters' problems are my problems. And so for us, how do we see what's happening a couple of neighborhoods away as something that affects me and my family, affects my church community, affects something that's even the body of Christ? What's happening here in New Orleans, how does it affect you out there in San Jose? Because at the end of the day, if we truly believe that we are all brothers and sisters in Christ, then we should care about everything in the same way. Yes, wildfires are happening. Those things are happening and need immediate attention. But there are other wildfires that are happening in our societal structure that are burning, us down as a community. There are people that don't care. And if they don't care, don't feel love, then they retaliate in various ways, right? I'm not talking about Black people that are rioting because they're fighting for justice. I'm talking about even when you look at school shootings, it's usually done by somebody that has been rejected by society because of societal norms. How do we as society turn back to love? If Jesus is love and the main commandment or the golden rule is love one another as I have loved you, how do we put that into our policies? How do we put that into our resources? How do we put that in those spaces and places that need attention in our diocesan budgets, state budgets, whatever it may be, and inquire and resources communities to take care of themselves? So for me, to combat racism is, one, to see that it exists, but also to see how we have been a part of it, and two and three, to see what resources we need to put in places to help people help themselves. Because like I said, the answers are in our communities, and it is not the responsibility of people of color to fix racism. That's what Bishop Cherie used to say all the time. It is the responsibility of those that are the white communities that benefit from it, have put it in place, but also to empower the Black and brown voices and other voices that are out there that are affected by racism to dictate to you and guide you in how to address it.
Absolutely.
So that's the challenge.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me. And I also wanted to thank you because I feel like my book that's coming out with Orbis only happened because I was talking with you when it was just a idea that I had, and you were encouraging me, yeah, submit to Orbis, and you were giving me the like paperwork that you had around it. So I wanted to thank you also for just
Oh,
being an encouraging person. And I think that that's just what you do in your role and in your ministry. You help other
amen.
people. Yeah.
And that's
So,
what we're supposed to do. So I can't change it. So I'm glad I helped you, my sister.
okay. Well, thanks so much.
All right.
Okay.